everybody. I'm Scott, and thanks for joining me again today for another episode of the RockLove Magazine Podcast, the podcast that celebrates the zine that ran from 1995 to 2001, where we take a look back at that magazine, at that era in music, as well as discussing what's going on today, and then doing what we're going to do today, which is discussing some of our favorite things, as the song goes. And I've brought back one of my favorite guests, Jeff Becker. Hey, man.
Hey, good to see you again.
Great
Looking forward to this one.
Thank you.
Good
Me
one.
too. Great to see you. Yeah, and so what we're going to do, what I said to Jeff is go back and think about, when you think about all the shows you've been to over the years, and for me, it's in the thousands, because when I was doing Rock Love, I was going, every night. I was going to 300 shows a year for a 5 or 6 year period there. And think about the ones that meant the most to you, that had the most spiritual meaning, or that out of the blue, or, just something where the pieces, when you put the pieces together, it's able to tell a little story that explains why this show was so important to you. And I will begin for today, my friend.
Yeah.
And let's see, on my list. Okay, so I'm going to go with my most recent one, which happened to me just a handful of years ago since I moved here to Las Vegas. And so one of the places I miss the most here in Las Vegas, which is now gone, is the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, which was on Paradise or whatever. It's where the Virgin Hotel is now. And they didn't change.
The Joint, right? Didn't they have the Joint?
The Joint at the Hard Rock, man. And it's what's there at the Virgin now. It's still the Joint room. They literally changed nothing, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
But so I saw some great shows there. But in 2000, let's see, I'm looking at 2019 at the end of August, after we'd been here just about a year. And my partner Susan and I said to ourselves, let's find a show and go treat ourselves and celebrate. And we've survived the desert summer, 2 desert summers now, And
Wow.
and so let's go see a show. So, and as luck would have it, and as you're going to see from a handful of these on my list, these things come to me out of the blue, like where you're flipping through a paper, or you see something online, or somebody tells you about something, as opposed to planning for it, right? And in the Las Vegas Weekly, which at the beginning when I got here, I was very religious about looking at every week for shows. I've kind of tailed off from it since then, and I should actually go back to it because it's a pretty good weekly paper still. I open up the paper, and I see 2 legends performing together. Okay. Now, one of them was Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, who, is great, but he's getting older at this point. Well, they're all old at this point. Everybody's old at this point, right? But when I think back to, and you and I talked about this another time when we talked about albums and we talked about the Beatles and things that got us going. One of the other things that also got me going was the British invasion before the Beatles. Bands like the Kinks and bands like the Zombies and just that, the Dave Clark Five, you could name on and on and on, right? And so I was familiar with the Zombies and had known She's Not There and Black Magic, not Black Magic Woman, Time of the Season. She's Not There was what Santana did, which is why I was thinking of Black Magic Woman. Yep. So I open up the paper and I see that the Zombies are opening for Brian Wilson. And so Brian Wilson, I'd have gone and seen any day, and I won't go into the Brian Wilson part of the story. I will save that for another day, because that is a story in and of itself. But we went and we, paid the extra money, and one of the final shows at the Joint at the Hard Rock, went and saw the Zombies open for Brian Wilson. And it was a spiritual event for me, because here, let me go through this set list with you that I was able to find and pull. So they began with a Bo Diddley cover, Roadrunner, which was, I guess they had been doing, but it just sort of took me back, right? Then they go into these songs that are theirs, but again, I wasn't, other than the British invasion hits and whatnot, I didn't know their catalog deeply. I knew the Kinks catalog very deeply because they're on my top list of bands, which will be another show that we'll have to do. But listen to this. So after Roadrunner, they do I Want You Back Again, which is, if you go and listen to zombie stuff, you'll recognize they did a couple of new songs, and then they go into Edge of the Rainbow, Care of Self 44, This Will Be Our Year, I Want Her, She Wants Me, Time of the Season, Merry Go Round, Tell Her No, which was a huge hit.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Rod Argent is the keyboardist in the Zombies. So then they do, which was to me one of the greatest hits of the 70s, which was Hold Your Head Up by Argent. And then finished with She's Not There. And it's only a 13-song set to open for Brian Wilson. They should have been the headliners. But
Yes.
I remember every moment of that show, and then I went back and did a deep dive study personally into their catalog and all their stuff. And in the 6 intervening years since 2019, this is one of my favorite bands to this day that, you know, I knew they were out there and knew their big stuff. And, you know, the thing with these bands is you got to really scratch beneath the surface. And, you know, and it took me till I was later in life. But when I did, I found something that the music is timeless and will live on forever. So there's my first
it's always been there. It's always been there in the background. And then when you see it and you, like you said, you do the research and you go see a band like that years later, it's like, wow, you know, it's like
totally
every one of those you named, by the way, it's a hit and everybody knows it, right?
Yep.
But they might not know it's the Zombies.
Right. You know, and ever since then, you know, and I was shocked at Colin Blunstone's voice at, you know, I don't know what he was 5 or 6 years ago. He was in his 70s. I mean, amazing. It's just like I recently saw, who should be on this list, but I had to squeeze him out. I recently saw John Anderson at the age of 80, and he sounds like he's 45. I mean, I was dying hearing him playing all those songs. So anyway, so that's my first one.
He could still sing that so high like that, you know.
Unbelievable. Crazy. So, all right, there's my first. Well, let's hear what you got.
All right, so I'm going to go way back, and it's interesting because I didn't see a lot of concerts as a teenager, but I started when I was 15. My sister, I lived in Long Island. My sister took me on the train, Long Island Railroad, to Madison Square Garden, which in itself is amazing, looking at the back of those Kiss covers, right? But I went to go see Billy Joel. It was my first concert. It was 1979 or 80 in the Garden. It was during Glass House's tour. And I was in awe, right? As a kid, being able to go to a iconic arena, right? Madison Square Garden, and see Billy Joel at his prime, in his prime. And it was, it's very memorable for me. The funny thing is my sister doesn't have the same memories I do. Of course, she's older. So
she had to have you with her.
Yeah. You know, all she said, she goes, I was a good sister, right? And I'm like, yeah, you were a good sister. But what a great concert. And we didn't have like, you know, front row seats or anything. We were probably somewhere in the upper middle, but you could see that stage. And it just, everything lit up. And you know, Billy Joel, I wouldn't consider, you know, I consider him extremely talented, but I was a rocker. You know, and I'm like, I'll go to Billy Joel. She's taking me, but he rocked out. There was some good guitar solos. Obviously, his piano work was great. And again, he was in his prime. The place was packed. I think at the time, the Garden only held about 17 or 18,000, but it felt big. You know, it felt big to be in the Garden and see a concert. And one memorable thing I remember, which is not musical, but you know, when he was talking to the audience. And I believe it was in June, and the Yankees were trying to get into first place. And I always remember it as it was World Series, but that would have been October, and I think this was a June concert. But it was probably a battle for the American League first place run. And he's like, the Yankees are winning. He said it 2 or 3 times. The Yankees are winning. They're up. It's a tough game. And at the end, you know, another break, he comes back after a song, and he's like, ladies and gentlemen, the Yankees won, and the place just erupted. It was like, yeah. Well, guess what? When we got out and we saw the score, they didn't win that night. So I'm like, that's crowd control for you, I guess, right? Nobody had cell phones. Nobody could look up and see if he was bullshitting us. But he was. So it kind of made me feel like, what a dick, you know, but it was Billy Joel.
That's so funny.
And It was really cool. And I grew up in a town that was right next to Oyster Bay,
Oh,
which is where he had his house. And I believe Glass Houses is that house you see from the sound. When we were on our boats, we could see the house. So there was a lot of cool memories about that concert, and absolutely have to say, it's on my top six because it was the first big concert I went to. So, but it was cool.
cool, cool. So Jeff and I in our 20s worked in a retail company together, which is how we've known each other for 40 years or whatever it's been. And and when I was running our San Francisco business in that company, and they moved me back to LA, and my
Yeah.
ex-wife and I had tickets for Billy Joel at the Oakland Coliseum, and we're like, fuck.
Oh,
So, but we took the effort, and after we'd moved to LA, flew
yeah.
back a couple of months later to go see that show at the Oakland Coliseum, which was
Great show. He
totally
puts on a
memorable.
great show. He's
Great
just a
show.
great entertainer.
Yep,
Fantastic entertainer.
yep, yep.
Um, but yeah, I enjoyed that one, and that's sitting on the top of my list.
Okay, so I'm going to move mine around now since you did that. So my second one will
Okay.
also be my first show. Okay, but before I tell you about my first show, also in that business you and I worked together when we were in the training program and working on corporate, or I was back in Chicago. Where was I? I was back in Chicago, wherever it was. At some
Yeah.
point in our lives in Chicago there in 1991, I was sitting in my desk on that 13th floor, as you'll remember, where those offices were and those police departments there.
Yeah.
And to me, one of the greatest rock and roll tragedies of all time happened. It wasn't really a tragedy. It was somebody who he died of an
Yeah.
illness because of his lifestyle, and that was Freddie Mercury. And I was
Uh,
in love with Queen, because when you talk about rock, I loved Led Zeppelin, but there was something about Queen for me that took it all to another level, especially those early albums were so hard, metal hard
Got Your Mother
rocking.
Down
And
hard. Yeah.
oh, and those voices, and I would cry. I cried for a week when Freddie Mercury died. So my
Mm.
first show was in 1970 at the old
Wow.
Boston Garden, which is not even there anymore. And I remember my mother saying to me, "What goes on at those concerts?" And I'm like, "Music," even though we all
Music
knew.
and fun.
Well, we were going to go party. That's what she was alluding to, was the drugs and the alcohol.
Right. Sure.
But this was the News of the World tour, which
Uh,
which was a great album, but also marked a tangential shift for Queen in the way that they approached their music and started getting into a lot more of the syncopated sounds and loops and whatnot. And obviously we all know. And We Are the Champions is like one of the great all time anthems to this day that's played all over the place. But that was a spiritual moment for me. It was literally my first show. Like I said, at the old Boston Garden, which we worship because A, the Bruins, but B, the Celtics had won all those championships there over the years.
sure.
And
Iconic.
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 And
Yeah.
I still recall that with a couple of friends from high school to this day who we went together to that show, and it was just a beautiful event. And watching Freddie strut around on that stage, he treated that half microphone stand as though it was an instrument. And yeah, I maybe other than Prince, I struggle to think of anybody whose showmanship was so theatrical like that. Prince would be another one, I would say. News of the World, man. That
Queen
was my
is
first.
that's that's amazing, and Queen is one that I never got to see in person, and I also am a Queen. I love the band. I thought, first of all, Brian May as a guitar player, just the tone that he gets, nobody even comes close to that. It's like, a signature player with hitting the notes. He's a signature tone player.
It sounds like a
Very hard,
vocal, his
very
tone,
unique.
don't you think? I mean, I don't know anything about music like you do, but to me
Well,
that
first of all, his guitar the Brian May guitar that he has was a kind of a Frankenstein in a way. His dad helped him build that guitar. I don't know. You probably, if you're a Queen fan, you probably saw the bio doc, the documentary. But he talks about that behind the scenes on how that guitar was made. Him and his dad made it. But the tone he has, it's kind of got like a mid bass to it. It's very unique, and the sustain that he gets out of those pickups, you can hear it in all the songs. I mean, it's unique and it's special. It's really cool. Everybody tries to mimic it. You have to have the right equipment to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a great one for you, right? Because I mean, it hits a lot of things. It hits the venue, it hits the band. The fact that you got to see Freddie Mercury, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, and
I
like
have to ask you,
go ahead, go ahead.
have you saved any of your concert tickets from way back when?
I did, but in all in the moving around and divorce and everything, you start shedding
Yeah,
shit. So, and I wish I
I got
had.
lucky, yeah, and saved a bunch. I actually have a book of all the
Nice.
tickets.
Uh,
But the oldest one is probably back in maybe the late 80s probably. But I started saving them back then. I started thinking, wow, I wish I could have saved some of these other ones, even if they weren't great venues. I got to see some of these classic bands.
and
Yeah, I
for
do. I
those that
save all
aren't
that shit.
as old and gray as us, you used to
Right.
literally have to go to the record store
Can I
and
show
wait.
you
Yeah, yeah, please.
tickets?
And while I'm talking to, please, and you used to hold them up right to your camera. You used to go to the record store and wait in line to buy concert tickets, hoping that you got them. And Ticketmaster had a outlet pretty much in every record store in town. In California, we used to go to the Tower Records in Mountain View and wherever.
The best place.
My biggest ticket story is my buddy and I, who also worked at that same company where you and I worked, we were in line at the
Yeah.
Tower Records in Mountain View for Paul McCartney tickets, and it sold out when
Oh wow.
we were four people from the front, and there was like sold out.
Oh,
Everybody go home.
that's crazy, right? All right. I'm going to give you my second,
Go
right?
for it.
Am I
Yep.
my second? All right. My second, which I'm going to show you, I actually have the ticket stub, was 92. There was a promotion company called Belkin. I went to go see Genesis at the Ohio Stadium,
Nice.
71,000 plus people. And I told you about Madison Square Garden with Billy Joel only had 17. This was outrageous. This was like being at, you're at the OSU football game, right? Packed. And they brought in, I remember, an extra section to get an extra like 15 or 20,000 people in. That concert, that was memorable just because it was like overwhelming to see all those people in one place screaming, and Phil Collins comes out and he at that point was basically Genesis. I mean, he took it over. He started doing his solo stuff. Um, I can't remember, was it I Can't Dance? I think was the famous one
Yep.
from
Yep.
that he had. But and I wasn't a huge Genesis fan, but again, it was an event. I wanted to go check it out, and I became a huge Genesis fan after that, which that's what concerts do to you. And iconically, Phil Collins went on to do some great stuff on his own. And I think right around that time, he was doing some of his solo stuff too, and he incorporated that, which was really cool. But it was a great that was a great venue to see a concert, and they don't do a lot at the Ohio Stadium anymore. But when they did a couple of these, I would always try to go because it was just so memorable to feel 70,000 plus people screaming for this band. And the sound was great, by the way. Super fantastic sound with all those people. You think it would get drowned out. It's an outdoor stadium, but they did a great job with that sound system, laying speakers all around the stadium. Unlike in the 60s when my parents went to see the Beatles at Shea Stadium, and they said it was so loud that they couldn't even hear the Beatles play. But
Yeah, but they were
but
there,
this was
man.
they were there. My parents were there at that. That
Wow.
was great. I wish I could have added that to mine, but no memorabilia, nothing, unfortunately, I got from that. But other than their stories. But I will say that Genesis concert, memorable for me, exciting, crowded. I remember even leaving was so congested, getting all those people out of the stadium at the time. But great. Just it was like it was so beautiful, and it was that when the sun was coming down, and it was a night concert. I mean, just so cool. I think they were pioneering a lot of the digital laser stage show stuff back then, and it was just really cool, man. We got to see some really cool, graphics in the back and everything, and just the laser shows, which were popular back in the early '90s. And again, the band did great. It was just fun. Another great experience.
So my largest show, which it stands in my memory because I'll never forget the dust that was kicked up, was
Yeah.
there's a car racetrack in Northern California, Laguna Seca. And yet another person that I worked with at that company that you and I were working at together when we were
Yeah.
running the thing for Nordstrom in the Bay
Yeah.
Area, he and I went, and it was the Grateful Dead and Los Lobos. In the end of
Oh,
July, it was fucking hot on this dusty car racetrack, but none of that mattered and didn't stop
yeah.
anybody.
No,
And a
too
great,
great.
great
Yeah.
bill. That was a great bill. So that was the biggest one. It was
That's
102,000 people. That was the biggest show I was ever at.
wow. That's crazy. That's crazy.
That's a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Nice. Nice.
Because
It's
even if
funny
you
when you
even
asked
if you
me
think
to
about
think about.
Lollapalooza or an outdoor show with 25,000, that's a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
people. That's still a lot of
Oh,
people.
but that was yeah. And I was at Lollapalooza in Chicago. I think the first year they did it, which was also in the early '90s, right?
Yeah,
90
yeah, yeah.
was it 93? I was the, I actually didn't live. I lived in Columbus and I flew back. That's not on my list, but there's so many like
I
that
know.
not on my list.
I
The
know.
big Jimmy Buffett concert. I just was trying to narrow it down. It's hard,
It's
right?
hard.
Because we went to so many cool shows.
Yep. Oh,
And I didn't even realize how many I had. But
okay. So
yeah,
here's my next one, and a, a list like this of mine would not be my
yeah,
list if it didn't take into account our namesake for what we're sitting here talking about. So I started RockLove Magazine after unceremoniously dumping from that company that you and I worked together
right.
for in 1995. And the reason I started the magazine and named it this way was because there was nothing more important to me musically in my life than Todd Rundgren and Utopia as well. And so I named the magazine Rock Love. At the time, I named the publication and production company Tortured Artist Publications, which was a Todd Rundgren album, Tortured Artists, the Tortured Artist Effect, ever popular Tortured Artist Effect. So, like, the Todd Rundgren's been deeply ingrained in my bones since the age of 14 and a half when a friend of mine out there who may be listening and watching this turned me on to both Utopia and marijuana in the same afternoon. So probably had the biggest impact of anybody in
There you
my
go.
life. So Todd, the thing about Todd Rundgren is he never sits still. He's always changing, especially the moment they told him after his first couple of albums as a solo artist in the early '70s that you're going to be the male Carole King. He wasn't going to be that, and started changing, and did A Wizard, a True Star, which is all these snippets of acid industrial music, and he would just go back and forth, never making the record companies happy and giving them what they wanted, which was just a bunch more "Hello, it's me's" and "We Got to Get Your Woman's," and "I Saw the Lights," and
Right.
so one of those when as he would diverge from doing his stuff, one of those was this band Utopia, which he put together like this proggy rock band with four guys. And instead of it just being all Todd all the time, it was going to be more of a band concept, which it was, but it was Todd really in charge. It began as like a 7-piece, excuse me, and morphed into like a 4-piece. With Roger Powell and Willie Wilcox on drums, and Kasim Sultan, who's a great bass and guitar player and has toured with Meatloaf and all kinds of great bands out there. Blue Oyster Cult he plays guitar with. But Utopia did a handful of albums, whatever it was, 6 or 7 or 8 albums, and then broke up. And that Todd went back to doing his solo thing, which is one of his best periods of his life at this post-Utopia period. And in 1992, they were signed, I believe, to some huge contract to put the band back together and go and perform. It was like 8 or 10 shows in Japan. And as you know, a lot of American artists and Western and British artists are huge in Japan. And Todd Rundgren probably had a bigger, at the time, Todd was, he's becoming more and more known and popular now as an aging Hall of Fame rock star because of everybody's dying and, not around anymore. But when everybody was around, not enough people took notice of him. That's one of the things we love, that he was ours, in our little group and everything. But anyways, so they're signed to this huge deal to do these 10 shows in Tokyo, in and around Tokyo. And so they sold out the minute they went on sale. And obviously, in order to prep for those shows, they had to do some sort of warm ups. So I happened to have been with that company you and I both worked for, have been moved back to Los Angeles at the time. And they announced that they were going to do these Utopia, it was called Utopia Redo, Redux, which I thought was a great name. These Utopia Redo warm up shows at this little club, well, and I think it was Redondo Beach. Like I never heard of all the places we went to see shows in and around in LA. I had never heard of this place.
Yeah, that's like a small town.
Tiny,
I know the
tiny
area.
little club. And it was just, and like I said, they did 4 or 5 warm-up shows, and we went to 2 of them.
Wow.
And it was that was a spiritual event. I had not seen Utopia prior. I had only seen Todd solo and in Chicago when we had moved to Chicago. So, I've seen Todd Utopia combination probably close to 40 times now. At this stage, I'd only seen him a couple of times. This was like my 5th show, 5th time seeing them. And so it was just spiritual because I knew all that Utopia stuff. They had this album called Oops, Wrong Planet, which people quote others as being their best, but that was my favorite. It just, when it came out, it really hit me. The songs, the lyrics, and that was a real band album where all 4, like the Beatles, all 4 of them took turns and did tracks on the album. And so like I said, this conversation wouldn't be one unless I had some sort of Todd and Utopia thing on my list.
You had to put Todd on. Yeah, that's awesome. Wow, great. That's a great one. Great memories in that, huh? Fantastic.
Great memories. And then subsequently I saw them when they did it again. Just before I moved here in Las Vegas, they did it again in Chicago in 2018. They did a Utopia. They just did a couple of shows. Was it one show, or they did a handful of shows and a small tour. And we saw the first one, which was in Chicago, and it was great. And that's the one that's on. If you go out and look for Utopia Live in Chicago 2018, that's the show I'm at. My service dog Castro, who's passed away since then, was there with us at the time. We took him to the show. So, that was a great, I mean, it's just a great, great, great band if you want to go discover something, if you haven't seen or heard Todd and Utopia live. I highly recommend.
Wow. Good advice. Good advice. Great advice. All right. Now, keeping on your theme of have to have this one in here, because for me, this shaped the way I play guitar and everything about just loving business and brands. And we know we're talking about only one band here, Kiss. They had the best branding. They still have the, crazy branding. I've been in trouble for some political stuff lately, but we won't get into that. So what's interesting is I told you on a previous episode about top albums and how I was in that music class and they put the needle down on the Kiss Alive album, and it was, it was over at that point. And got the album.
So funny.
But I never saw Kiss until 1998. This is after they had different players and they got back together on the Psycho Circus tour at Nassau Coliseum in Long Island. I went back to see the original 4, Peter, Gene, Ace, right? And Paul. Got to see the original Kiss in what was, I guess, billed as their reunion tour, coming back, the original in 3D.
Wow.
Which I still have the original 3D paper glasses from 98. And first of all, I was like, how is this going to work? And I remember, talk about memories, right? I walk in, first of all, I was like a kid again, right? I was 30, some mid-30s, and I'm acting like a kid going, I can't believe I'm going to get to see Kiss in New York, right? It wasn't the Garden, it was the Nassau Coliseum. But it was the old one. It was pretty cool venue to see a band in. And we're walking in and we get through the ticket stub and they give us these paper 3D glasses. And I'm thinking, how is this going to work, right? I mean, 1998, like, okay, let's check it out. It was like the old red and blue. And I still have them somewhere here that, you put them on and it did the red and blue picture, whatever. So I remember they opened the concert up. And the same thing, ladies and gentlemen, you wanted the best. You got them. The hottest band in the land, Kiss, right? And it was like total pitch black stadium. And it was boom, an explosion, and all like this it looked like confetti was coming out, but you had your glasses on. It said, "Put your glasses on," a big sign, and it would look like confetti was just all around you. And they came out, of course, started with Detroit Rock City or something crazy like that. And I remember this is a cool way to see a band, an iconic band for me that I never got to see until I was 30 something. But it was very cool. It was very cool to have the original band playing all the hits, going back to your childhood, that whole thing. So very awesome experience in 3D, which was interesting. And they did it the whole concert. They had these, they were like pioneers, of course, of just having a phenomenal stage show, right? And they had these giant screens at the time all around back, much bigger than what I remember even today, just giant screens. And they were all in 3D. So you could see them in 3D while you could see the regular band. And then all the effects were in 3D as well, and they were just popping out. I remember Ace Frehley was doing a solo, and it was like somehow they had him spinning, but it looked like he was coming at you, So, I mean, if you had any drugs in your system at the time, it was scary. But very fun concert, and definitely on the top memorable concerts that I've been to.
You Kiss guys are a group unlike others. So one of my
The
best
thing is,
friends.
there was many years I hated Kiss. As I got into playing guitar more and got more technical, I'm like, this band sucks. Like, they're not really a good musicians band. But boy,
Put
could
on a
they
show.
really entertain? Could they
Yeah.
entertain? And the branding was just sick. And that's what brought me back to them around that time they got back together, which was originally on MTV Unplugged when they did Kiss Unplugged, and Peter, Chris, and Ace Frehley came on as special guests, which probably was all set up, and people went crazy, and that's how they started that tour, and that's the one that the Psycho Circus album, was made, and that's the one I got to see.
That's
But
great.
anyway, yeah, lots of good memories for
Great
me
one.
there.
So for everybody watching, I'm going to slide into this before I go on to the next one now. A clip of my friend Michael Idlis, who's a friend of mine from childhood, who was Kiss's one of their publicity people, and used to tour go on the
Oh
road with
wow,
them and do anytime they would do radio and stuff like that and all kinds of promotion stuff. So here, take a listen to this clip, and you want to hear somebody who maybe is big, if not a bigger fan of Kiss than you, because they were like his first favorite band too at 10 years old. But here, take a look at this clip.
nice.
Hey, who else did you work with?
Uh, the fun stuff, it was Bon Jovi. I think the most fun I ever had, only because Kiss Alive was the first album I cut lawns and shoveled driveways for to afford to go out and buy, and go down to Ladd's Music in Cranston, Rhode Island, and buy Kiss Alive, man. I couldn't wait. And so to have the opportunity to work with Kiss as closely as I did, albeit the non-makeup years, was really a pleasure. Like, I would, especially when I moved to LA, because I feel like, Jesus Christ, what am I doing in Gene Simmons' house? This is insane. He'd be like, come over, we'll all meet at my house. And we'll go to the interview from there. And I'd be like, and it just, I never felt like I deserved that. You know what I mean? I never felt like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be here. I was like, these are my childhood freaking heroes, man. I loved Kiss when I was 10 years old. It was the first concert I ever went to, and to be hanging out with Paul and Gene in their houses was insane. But again, they did whatever they had to do to get the job done. And I remember one time in particular in Minneapolis, we had a long day. They got in, I think it was Gene and Eric, and they were doing a promotional tour for that hit that they had called Forever. This was probably 1990. And they got in really late, and I said, Gene, we got to be on the air in Minneapolis. Well, they flew into Minneapolis. We got to be on the air in the morning show at 6:30. He's like, all right, I'll be there. I got to the lobby at 5:45. I said, meet me in the lobby at 6. So I got there at 5:15. Gene was downstairs waiting for me. And that's how it was every single time. They were the proest of the pros, man, and they did what they had to do. And they were good guys. I mean, were there egos? Absolutely. Did Paul need to be the biggest star in the room every single time? Yes. Did Gene have to have every woman at his disposal every single time? Yes. But it was still a pleasure, man. I mean, they did what they had to do, and we got the work done, and they always sold 1 million records, man. With or without play, they sold 1 million records.
It's it's just another one of those tales of, the public only sees the iceberg above the water, but all the work is what lays beneath that you don't see. So another clip, I'm going to play another clip of his right now, which will lead into my next story. So as I said, my friend Michael Idlis is a promotions and PR guy at Mercury Records. And one of their artists, somebody who I've had a couple of things happen with live with for me in my life, is John Mellencamp. And so here, listen to this story about him being John Mellencamp's publicity guy and one of the biggest fuck-ups on the planet.
Do you want to hear an ugly story?
I want to hear we love mishaps and ugly stories. Go for it.
Well, this is just an example, like, whereas most of I'm telling you, like 90% of the artists I worked with were a pleasure. John Cougar Mellencamp, not so much. Not so much. So the story was, they talked him into doing a promo tour of the country in support of Whenever We Wanted was the album, and the single was Get a Leg Up. Not one of his bigger hits at all at that point. But he was like, what do I got to do? And the manager was like, man, let's go on a promo tour. You're going to play acoustically. You're going to play at restaurants. You're going to perform in front of winners and listeners, and the whole thing was great. It was a time where he realized that he's going to have to start doing this stuff, because it was a time where he wouldn't. He was like, no meet and greets, no radio. I'm not doing anything. But my album out, you're going to play it. It's a hit. But it kind of starting at like pop singer. That's when he started realizing, oh, every one of my songs isn't going to be a top 5 smash. Wow, I better do something. So we're on the road. So and this was a weird thing, because I was actually going back and forth I was actually moving to LA. I was the local in Seattle. And it was the last day of the promo tour, of course, as far west and north as you could possibly go. The Northwest was the last stop on the tour. And the guy and his manager was like, man, are you sure this is going to be okay? Because John is freaking tired. He's kind of sick of this tour, and everything's really going to go well. Now, I had already promised all these stations that we were doing it. They had set everything up. I was like, man, we're doing it. I'll be there. Don't worry about me moving to LA. I'll freaking be there. It'll be fine. So the first stop was Seattle, and the top 40 station in Seattle. They did it at a restaurant. And I guess the way it was supposed to go was like everybody would eat and drink and at their tables and enjoy. And John would come on, and everything was supposed to stop. Like no serving, no eating, no drinking. You're just supposed to stop. Nobody sort of made me aware of this fact. And I have to tell you, man, when I got into the van after this event, he yelled at me like my father never yelled at me. And can I drop that bomb? Can I drop that bomb?
Of course you can.
I'll never forget the quote. I had to stop I almost laughed. He goes, who the fuck do you think I am? Richie Sambora at some tit-waving, beer-drinking teenage fucking rock show? And I was like, no, yes. And I went like this to say something. So I was like, this guy's screaming at me like, come on, man. I was like, and Kenny Aronoff was next to me, the drummer, and he went, slap my hand down. He was like, don't do it. Don't do it. And so when he got out of the van, he was like, I just saved you a really long walk, bro, because I'm telling you right now, if you said what I think you were going to say, he would have left you on the highway. I've seen it happen in the middle of the night 100 times. You're welcome. I was like, oh my God.
And what you were going to say was what?
Who the fuck do you think you are? Richie Sambora, some bitch trying to team in rock show? Because
right. Well, at that time, Richie Sambora is the bigger star at that moment.
100%. So the next day, we had to be at the Rocks. I'll never forget it. KXRX Seattle, 96.3. Now, this was 1991. So the whole dot thing was very forward thinking at the time, And we had to be there at 7. He hated me, man. He probably still hates me. It's okay. I can admit it. All my other artists love me. If I could say Paul and Gene love me, that's good enough for me. And I can deal with John Mellencamp hating my guts, because he definitely did. He even said there was this like sort of promo guy named David Kragscow, who was really the worst promo guy on our team. And Mellencamp goes to me, you're worse than David fucking Kragscow. I was like, oh, shit. Bad, man. That's really bad. There couldn't be a worse insult. Like, honestly, I was like, oh no, he's comparing me to David Kragscow. Oh, he didn't talk to me the next day. It was over, man. We got into the elevator. I'm telling you, he looked like the American flag. His skin was pale white. His eyes were still blue, but very red. Like he did not look good. And he was just looking at me like, no, morning, nothing. So we get up there, there's some some audience members there, and we're broadcasting live and the whole thing, and he's doing Small Town. In the middle of Small Town, he just stops. And he was like, I just blacked out. And it turns out that was his first heart attack. He had a heart attack on the air at KXRX in Seattle, and I was there, and I was like, karma's a fucking bitch, isn't it? I didn't say that, but I thought it, obviously we had to cancel. We had 2 more stops that day. Had to cancel him because he was in surgery in Seattle, getting a stent or whatever.
So anyways, like I said, I've had a couple of things with John Mellencamp. One of which was one of which was before this story I'm going to tell, where when again, a lot of these stories are when you and I, from the time in our 20s when we were working for that company. I was in Northern California, living in a little town called Mountain View, which is a bit south of Palo Alto, so all south of San Francisco, and there's this amphitheater called the Shoreline Amphitheater, which is to this day still operating, one of the great venues. It is like out on the edge of the bay between San Jose and San Francisco, and it's out there on its own in this little town called Mountain View on a great plot of land, and I've been to hundreds of shows there over the years. I used to even have a private box there for a while for when I was doing the magazine. But long before the magazine, one day I was in line at that Shoreline Amphitheater to get tickets for somebody else. I don't even remember who. And my ex-wife and I were sitting there waiting in line, and we get to the one just before being able to buy the tickets, right? And this time we didn't not lose our place, but right as we're in that near the next in line slot, they announced this John Mellencamp show. And we're the next in line. And so she and I walk up there, and we get front row seats at Shoreline Amphitheater for regular price, which, like, when does that ever happen?
Wow.
So, but that's
amazing.
That's the secondary story. This story, the John Mellencamp story that I want to tell, again, has to do with when you and I were working in that company. At this point now, I've been moved back to Chicago to run the company's corporate-owned division back in Chicago. And it's at the corner of State Street and Monroe in downtown Chicago. The company's out of business, so somebody else is there now. It was a T-Mobile last time I was in Chicago and looked. But anyways, we used to leave the building at lunchtime to go out and find a place to eat. And you're in downtown Chicago. There were lots of choices. And in fact, and again, this is that same office and building where I was telling my Freddie Mercury story earlier. But one day we go out to lunch, and a couple of blocks down on State Street, let's say like 3 blocks down, there was a building they took down. They brought the building down. It was an old building, and it was going to be rebuilt. And so now it was a vacant lot, and it was fenced off, this vacant lot. Mm-hmm. So as we're walking down the street going to lunch, and this is in September of 1993. In fact, this is 9/11/93. So, but before the tragic 9/11 happened,
right.
We are walking down the street, and you hear this music coming from this empty lot. And because the fencing was up, it was a little muffled. You couldn't tell what it was. And we're in our suits and ties, and we used to go catch a buzz at lunchtime. And so we go up to see what's going, and the guy goes, the guard goes, if you want to come in, you're welcome to come in. Just take your spot and pay attention and blah, 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 blah. If you see the sign over there, we're filming for a video. So if you go and look this up, we're in there for like a millimeter of a split second. Go look up John Mellencamp, Human Wheels at downtown Chicago lot, September 93. The video will come up. And he and the band set up, and they did a half-hour, 40-minute set in this empty dirt lot with, I don't know, there's 200 or 300 or 400 of us there at the most, just whoever was filtering in at downtown Chicago at the time. And
does the video have you in the back? Can you see yourself back there?
You can like if I put it on my editing software and increase the timeline and
make
slow,
out that guy
I
in the
could
suit.
show. Well, no, I know exactly where it is. I have another story
Yeah.
like that I'm going to tell you too. That's
Okay.
that, but that one you can see us clearly, and yeah, and it was just a great time. And like, so, we had it, I don't even remember if we had lunch, but we had got a buzz. We walk into this thing and we watch JCM for 40 minutes do this set. And then we go back for lunch. And I have proof of it because there is a YouTube video for it online.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to look that one up.
Yeah. John
That's awesome.
Mellencamp, Human Wheels in Chicago, 9/11/93. It'll come right up.
Wow. Awesome. All right. You ready for, what are we on, 4?
We're on 4. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. No particular order, by the way. This one also takes place not far from the Evans office in Chicago on South State Street back in 2001. I was on business. I was in a technology company. And again, one of the 2 things that I always did, well, actually 3 things. I would visit a vinyl store, I would visit a guitar store, and I would try to catch a concert or a local music act whenever I traveled. I traveled a lot over those past 25, 30 years. So I was back in Chicago, right? My old stomping grounds around Evans, and I love blues. When I lived in Chicago, I always went north to like US Blues, which is no longer, of course, Kingston Mines, which is still there and fantastic. And just hitting the blues clubs were great. So I was with a group of buddies that I was working with, and we decided we were more in the south end of town doing some business. And I said, let's go to Buddy Guy's, Legends Lounge on, I think it was South State Street at the time. And let's just go. I just want to go in. It was early. It was like around 6:30, and see if what's playing there. And if we get lucky, we'll buy some tickets, whatever. I don't know. I've never been there. So we walk in, and nobody's in there, just the ticket counter, and like they have like a merchandise counter in the front, and a guy that was sitting on like a stool, whatever, reading the paper, drinking a coffee, whatever. That was Buddy Guy. And I'm
Nice.
like, oh my God, I think that's Buddy Guy, but I don't want to be rude. Like I want to make sure, I mean, he was very, he was just sitting there, very approachable.
I interviewed him
And
for
I
the
went,
magazine. I'll play that tape for
Okay.
everybody at some point in future episodes.
Yeah. So again, we're all in suits, right? We weren't going out. It was early. Like I said, at dinner time, we're just going to see what's going on. And I went over and I said, hey, how you doing? What's going on here tonight? He goes, oh, we've got some bands playing. I'm going to be maybe going up a little bit. And I'm like, oh, hey, nice to meet you, Buddy Guy. And he's like, yeah. He goes, I'm going to be doing a few songs from my new album. My new album called Sweet Tea. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to also buy, at the time it was mostly discs, CDs. I'm going to buy your CD. Would you mind signing it? First of all, he was the nicest guy in the world. He was telling me stories about, he was telling me like how he was, and this was 2001. He was telling me that he was first coming back into popularity because all the people he helped, like the Rolling Stones, he was telling me about Clapton. He goes, they're all great guys, but I never got the credibility. But now I'm just humbly having a good time in my club, playing out every now and then, which of course, the past 20 something years, he's done really well. He was just in the Sinners movie, whatever. So anyway, I'm going to just show it to you. He signed it, and I have the CD here. I don't know if you could see it, Buddy Guy.
Tilt it a little bit. There you go. That right there. Just hold that a second.
Yeah.
Nice.
Buddy Guy 2001.
Very nice.
And I'm going to continue this story just a little bit longer. That's not all that happened. First of all, like I said, it was super nice. We hung out. We bought the tickets. I think we went around the corner to get a quick bite. We came back for the show, and we're hanging out. And I don't think it was anyone that was really famous or popular at that time other than Buddy Guy when he did his set. But all of a sudden, and it was pretty busy because it's a famous, it's Buddy Guy Legends. It's always busy. And we're sitting at the table, and this group of guys came in, and they looked like rock stars. And one guy had this jean jacket on and just like with patches all over it. And I'm like, he's got to be somebody. And he goes right to the stage, and Buddy Guy's up there, and he goes, hey, I brought some of my friends who are doing a Beatles tribute. And you might know some of these guys. I'll introduce you after the first song. So I'm watching this guy in the blue jean jacket pick up a bass, plug it into an amp, and fucking loud, like much louder than the guitar. And I'm like, oh, I think I know who that is, but let me see. Well, it was John Entwistle from The
Nice.
Who was doing a tour. So, Buddy Guy, I still have this. This is the newsletter that he had, and Buddy Guy signed it. And on the back, if you could see, is John Entwistle's signature. I got him to sign
Nice.
it as well. This is I started archiving a lot of these autograph things I had. But boy, that was super memorable, and I still can't believe it. Now, the odd thing about this is I think it was 2 weeks later, he was found dead in a hotel room in Las Vegas.
Wow.
So I really got to see him right at the end of that whole, whatever that time is, or, that he died. But anyway, I think that's the timing. But that was just super memorable, being, loving the blues, being a guitar player, loving The Who. Never saw The Who with him, but I have seen The Who. But that was a great, I'm going to call it a great memorable
we
concert.
saw The Who at Shoreline Amphitheater that I was talking about earlier. It was the first or second show after he died. So remember, he died in the middle of a tour, John Entwistle, and they literally took a handful of days off and then just continued the tour.
Right.
And we saw at Shoreline, I think it was the second show that they did after the startup with the new bass player. I don't remember who it was.
Maybe hopefully I have the years close or right, but I think it was shortly after that he passed. Yeah. But just an amazing experience. And I think there were other famous people that I didn't know who they were, but I was just so focused in on how loud and how good his bass playing was.
Well, talk about an
seeing him
iconic sound for a player. Like we were talking about guitarists earlier, but that bass playing was iconic.
Oh,
You knew it was him.
Well, and The Who is I mean, I love The Who, but they're famous for being one of the loudest bands in the world, right? Between him and Townsend, right? I could see why. I couldn't believe how loud the bass. I was not expecting it to be like that. It was amazing.
Very nice.
That's my fourth.
Awesome. Great story. Okay, so my next one, again, continuing on my theme of these surprise shows, and it's just amazing that they happen. So I moved to Seattle. We moved to Seattle in 2009, and we're getting settled in and everything, and you start exploring your new cities and whatnot. And over near the Space Needle is a very unique building that was designed by Frank Gehry. And it was, I don't know if it is still all red. It was all red and silver. It was the funkiest looking thing you ever saw. And it was called the Experience Music Project Museum.
Charter member, baby.
Yep.
Now it's a different name. They changed it, but I know all about that.
They changed it to the Music and Comic something or other museum now, so it's changed its name. But it was an amazing. It was pretty new at that point. And
can I just say one thing?
Yeah,
that
please.
Building you talked about, when you fly over Seattle and you're coming in and they fly over that, it looks like the Jimi Hendrix guitar because Paul Allen loved Hendrix.
Yep.
That he was the original funder of that.
Yep. So, and a great place. So, from the first time we walked in there and toured the place and saw they had fabulous music displays and whatnot. And in the center, they had, instead of a chandelier, they had this big round fixture with multiple rows and hanging from it just guitars all around, if you've been there. And that won us right over. So, what we did was after the first visit there was we joined, we became members of the place. And so they would send you, periodicals and whatnot and their newsletter and things. And so you would get the chance to see everything first before it happened.
Right.
And
EMP had the big format, if I remember, the big magazines, which I think I still have some of those.
Oh, I'm sure. God, you're amazing keeping that stuff.
Oh, we should do a tour of some of the stuff I have.
We should,
cool.
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. I should have called upon you back when I was doing the magazine for some of it back then.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, right when you walked into EMP and you paid your money and went into the museum, to the right when you walked in was this big room. What was it called? The Sky Church. And it was a big room with big, huge ceilings, and they would have shows in there. and the place maybe held 200 people, maybe squeezed in 200 people. Well, on this night, they squeezed in 200 people. So I get the newsletter, and it came to us, and it said on March 5th, 2010, Heart will be performing in that room and filming a video. And it was some sort of Christmas video or something. So they did this. So my friend Wayne and I, who's still in Seattle, and he and I talk about this still to this day. He and I went to this show. It was an amazing show. That was a spiritual moment, because anytime you could see huge bands in a small setting, that was special. You know, I saw Tom Petty at the Fillmore with only 1,000 people. That was neat. So all those kinds of, you know, I told you about Faithless in another podcast that we did, you know, which was a band that sold to 50,000 people in Europe, and you see them at this little 1,000 seat place. So those kinds of things were great. So there was like 200 people in this Sky Church at the EMP for this show, and they put this out as a video, and there was this crane camera that kept coming up in and behind us all the time. My friend Wayne, who's Chinese, you can, and you see it over and over. You see the back of his black hair and my bald spot, like over and over and over, every time the fucking thing craned on us. And it's in that video. And that was just that, again, those little types of gatherings, you know, like maybe sometime we'll do another one of these about those, where like, what are the tiniest little things that you saw that moved you also.
Yeah.
But those kind, anytime I had moments like that, like the Mellencamp thing, and like this, where it's, you know, just a couple hundred people for somebody that could easily draw demand of 20,000. You know, I always found spiritual like that. I had a moment like that with Todd Rundgren too, at Tower Records, where, you know, it's like just 100 of us, and he was demonstrating new technology that he's working on, and so all those little types of things I hold dear.
Stuff.
So yeah, I miss that stuff. But this was a great show, and and like I said, they had Alison Krauss and the Doc Watson family as guests, and they did some Christmassy. It was for a Christmas video, and they did some you know, in between the Heart songs, and a couple songs they did retakes on because something wasn't right, or the makeup girl didn't like the makeup, and I mean, so, like, you know, we had to sit there and be part of the taping of this DVD.
Wow.
So yeah, fun time.
That's amazing. And by the way, when you said EMP, I mean, we have Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, in Ohio, which is great. It's fun. It's gotten better. But EMP was just that level above.
Well, it's a passion project, right? It was just. It wasn't about awards. You know?
And what was great about it is the technology that he was using when they opened it up. When you walked in, you got the record. You know, the I guess it was on a hard disk at the time. It looked like a little Walkman, and you walked around, and
that was great.
They didn't have that at Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You were on your own. Now I think they do have that. They probably picked up a couple of the good things before they sold it to whoever owns EMP.
No, but like you said, that was Paul Allen's passion project, and
absolutely,
you know, and it was just, and then they had that amazing grunge section from the whole grunge thing that had just happened 15 years earlier. So I mean, it was an incredible. That was a really special night.
Yeah, I know you were lucky that you got to live there, because what a great place. I had, when I was on business, I had two people in Seattle that worked with me. And we would go do crazy music stuff all the time because it was so rich with music. But I love that city. That was fun.
Great music city. All right, what do you got?
We're on what, 5?
We're
number 5?
on 5, yeah.
All right, for number 5, I'm going to pick one that's got a little bit of a story to it. When I was in technology, you know, again, when I traveled, I always went out and tried to see music. And at the time, we were having a failing Latin America business. And I raised my hand and said, I'll do the US and Latin America. And they're like, okay, we're probably going to close the office in Mexico, but things were bad. You know, there were a lot of US people getting abducted and kidnapped and all this stuff. I'm like, I don't, you know, whatever. I mean, I'll run it the best I can. And I remember that everyone was like nervous to go down there. And I had a trip to go see a large bank in Mexico with my Mexico, you know, crew that was down there. And my senior VP did not want to go. And I took the COO. He said, "Hey, man, I travel all around the world. I lived in Singapore. I'll go with you, Jeff." Great guy, became a great friend of mine. And we met in Mexico in the airport, and we had a phenomenal time and did a lot of business. And the crew that was there, I said, "Hey, if we sign this deal with the bank, we're going to go see," which one of my favorite bands and one of their favorite bands was Rush. And they were coming back on tour. And I'm like, "We're going to go." In fact, I saw that they were going to be in Las Vegas. And they're like, "Oh, we would love to go to Las Vegas in the US and see." I go, "Let's get the deal." So we got the deal signed, and I said, "We're there." So we go. It was 2010 in Las Vegas at the MGM. Okay, so lots of memories with those core Mexico team. But it was me and three of the Mexican guys, and they loved it. They were like, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they have great concerts in Mexico, but being in the US, being in Las Vegas, being at the MGM, seeing Rush, Rush, another great band of, they're great
Great live
performers, they're
band.
great musicians. And, they started with a 20-minute video. I think it's still out on YouTube from 2010, and how the band started, but it was like a joke, it was like a Monty Python type joke thing, but it was hilarious. They ate it up. I ate it up. I thought it was great. I was so happy that they had a great time. I had a great time, and super memorable. Now that's a great stadium. You may have been there. MGM it's a great venue to see a
Yep,
band.
I've been
I
there.
actually
Yep.
also saw, I'll couple it in, but it's not one of my favorite, but it was interesting. I saw Aerosmith open for Kiss. And I'm going to tell you,
Wow.
I'm an Aerosmith fan, right? But I was there because I wanted to see Kiss
Right,
again.
right.
Aerosmith came out and killed it. They were like amazing. And there was one of those tours where they would open for Kiss and then Kiss would open for them in other cities. But the one at the MGM, they opened, they were fantastic. That was kind of a cool show. But the Rush one was the memory that I'm going to put in as my number 5.
Wow, nice story. A nice reward story too. All right, so
Yeah, exactly.
Jeff and I did not plan this at all, and these are just lining up perfectly. So my sixth one has to do with a out of country experience also. So this is really weird that they're just lining up this way. This is totally unplanned, right? We did not talk about this at all,
No, we didn't
other
talk
than come up with
about it.
6 of these. Okay, so in 2001, my mother-in-law took all the kids and did we have any grandkids back then? Yeah, we had grandkids back then. So she had all the kids and her grandkids. I think we had one of our two by then, to France, to the south of France. No, my son was born too, because he's 99 and this is 2001. So in 2001, she took us to the south of France, and for one of those beautiful 2-week vacations, we rented this fabulous villa for all 10 or 12 of us, whatever we were, to stay in. And it would get hard on me sometimes being cramped into the house with all of my in-laws and whatnot for, days on end.
Sure.
So eventually I learned to start walking into town, and I found a coffee shop, and I would go in with my euros and, get a Danish or a croissant and a coffee, cafe au lait, and would pick up the paper and start reading the paper. And I knew enough French to like order food. In fact, my French was so bad. We spent months practicing our French before we went. My French was so bad that when we got off the plane and went to the train station to get on the train to go into town, I said to the woman when she gave me my change, I said, or when I asked for the ticket, I said "por favor" instead of "s'il vous plaît." That's how bad my French was. So.
They didn't have Duolingo back then.
Right. So anyways, so I would go to this cafe every day to get away from everybody and, just chill for a little bit, have a coffee, have a croissant, and just look at the pain. And at the time, 2001 was one of the Iraq wars or something or other was going. Yeah, because it's like right around the time of 9/11, either before or after. It's probably before, because we went to France in the summer when it was hot as shit.
Yeah.
And so on the second to last day of our trip, I'm in this coffee shop, and I pick up the newspaper, and there's a picture of the band Muse, who at the time is the largest band in the world. You know, they were the largest band in the world in 2001, I would say. Touring band. They were at the apex of their popularity.
Yeah.
And like I said, I didn't read French, but I saw a picture of the
You
band
could see the
Muse,
band.
and it had these words, Festival de Nimes. Okay, Nimes is a city in France. So
Mhm.
I did not finish my coffee or my croissant. I took this newspaper and I ran back to the villa. And my sister-in-law spoke French. So I asked her what it said, and she couldn't figure it totally out. And then the house cleaner came an hour or two later. I'm like, what does this say? You know, I'm like struggling
Right.
with my Franglish.
Right.
And she said,
Right.
it says, she basically got through to me that it says, Muse is playing the closing night at this Festival de Nimes. Now, the Festival de Nimes takes place in this it's like an old Roman city, Nimes. It's a beautiful, beautiful old city. And it has an old stone Coliseum in the middle of town. Literally all the coffee shops and restaurants and everything revolves around this it's like an ancient stone Coliseum, like all stone.
Wow.
And so I'm
It's the
struggling.
Red Rocks of France.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So I'm struggling to figure out how to buy fucking tickets and whatnot. And finally, I'm like, I begged the housekeeper. I'm like, I get her on the phone, and she orders us these tickets to be picked up at the festival box office later that night. So my ex-wife and I and the kids, we went first on the way there in between Nimes and where we were staying. It was the town of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So we went and spent the day wine tasting and going into the caves at Châteauneuf-du-Pape and another experience in and of its own, had dinner. And then we end up in this 2,000-year-old Coliseum, this old stone Coliseum with 20,000 French people seeing Muse. And then they had this awful punk band from LA open for them. I can't remember the name now. But it was a religious experience in that it was the first moment I'd experienced seeing a show with a foreign culture. And, you know, you would hear the people all around you, this 25,000 people, whatever there was in the place, not a word of English, but they knew every word to every song in English, and they were up, you know, super massive black hole, and
wow.
it's just, and A, the show was amazing. B, it's in this 2,000-year-old Coliseum with literally pitch perfect acoustics, like one of those places where, you know, you could do plays without microphones and hear it all the way in the back. You know, because they didn't have microphones back then,
Right.
and
Right.
and it's just an amazing experience. But then, like I said, the icing on the cake was seeing 20,000 French. That was the moment,
amazing.
and this is after RockLove. I was done with RockLove by then, at right about this time, because 2001 is when we shut the magazine down. But this was just that moment where I had this spiritual thing of music really does bring the world together, because these people don't speak the same language as I, and yet here they know every single word, and they knew the meaning of it, not just the word. They knew, you know, what, and Muse is a very politically active band, and their lyrics and whatnot. So yeah, so that was a great,
That's awesome.
the Festival de Nimes.
That's awesome. That reminds me of seeing the videos of Rage Against the Machine in other countries, and very political, and people were just like screaming the words, and it's like, wow, that's a good one. Unfortunately, you probably didn't have phones back then to take pictures, or it would have been nice to have some
No, but there are, but
memorabilia.
I looked it up, and there are videos of that show. It's
Oh,
Muse
good. Oh, that's good.
live at Festival de
Archive.
Nimes.
All right, so the next one, I had to, you know, again, there's so many cool concerts. Like you said, it's tough to kind of narrow it down, but I picked one that was because I tried to think of stories and memories and things like that. And I've been to this several years. It was called Rock on the Range. And it was a giant rock concert in Columbus at the old Cruz Stadium, the soccer stadium, which is no longer a soccer stadium. It's actually just a concert venue now. But when they did the first concert there, it was really cool. And I was doing a hobby music business at the time, so it was ideal, right? And there were a lot of these 90s bands playing. This was all in the early 2000s. and my sister-in-law was dating a guy from the record company, and he would travel all around the country. And he said, "Hey, I'm coming to Columbus. One of my bands, Papa Roach, is going to be playing. Do you guys want tickets?" I'm like, "Yeah, we want tickets." But we didn't just get tickets; we got backstage, and we basically had an all-access pass to what was billed as the largest rock concert at the time, when these big festivals were just starting out. So there were probably 30 or 35 bands. But the reason it's memorable for me and I loved it wasn't Papa Roach, which they're nice, they're good, but it was Stone Temple Pilots. And I was also in a band at the time. We did a lot of Stone Temple Pilots songs, and I love that band. And and this is when Scott Weiland was with them, right? So this is pretty cool.
He was
So
amazing.
I know, and because we had all access, we didn't see the concert in the front row or out in the stadium. We saw it backstage. We were on scaffolding on the side
I've done that. I love
watching all
that.
these bands. And when Stone Temple Pilots, I'm like, this is another one of those, like, I can't believe I'm here. Pinch me, right? And my wife and I were watching this, and she's a photographer, so she had a camera. My sister-in-law was a photographer for the station, so she was actually taking pictures for her boyfriend, who was, whatever. So it was really cool that we got to do that and be on that scaffolding watching Scott Weiland and Dean and his brother play. Just a great experience and great music, great sound. They were spot on that night. And it was probably one of the, that last years of him being in that band, and it's all spiraled for him. But how fun that was. Super memorable. Lots of bands, big concert, backstage, shaking hands with, I remember so many bands that we were just part of the band. We were sitting there eating with them back, at the food service. Um, and also one more story there that was cool was a good friend of mine. Unfortunately, he passed away, but he was a chef, and he was a chef for many, many people, even back in the day, Michael Jackson, Charlie Sheen. He did a lot of the sports guys. He lived on the property of Warner Brothers and cooked for that family, but he became very friendly with Tom and Pam Anderson, Tommy Lee and Pam Anderson, and he would cook for them. And then they got divorced, and he worked for Pam Anderson, and was at her house all the time. And he had a place that I almost invested in called Black Steel in L.A., but that's a whole nother story. But anyway, he was friendly with both of them, and he was friendly with Tommy Lee. And Tommy Lee to this day even does some cooking on his Instagram and talks about it. But he was backstage. Motley Crue was playing at Rock on the Range, and I went up to Tommy Lee and I'm like, "Jason, chef, Bobson." And he goes, "Oh my God, how do you know him?" I'm like, "He's from Columbus and he's from New York. We were best friends here, still great friends." And we got to talk, and he was just super, super cool. Tommy Lee, everyone thinks he's crazy, but I mean, he was super nice.
Very nice guy. I've talked to him. Yeah.
Couldn't have been friendlier, right? And I'm a stranger and backstage just talking to him, but just fun. So many memories, so many good times at Rock on the Range in Columbus, and just a great experience all around, and seeing lots of great bands.
So I'll add to these both of these stories that you just told. Stone Temple Pilots was one of the first bands we covered in the early days of RockLove.
wow.
Hopefully, I've dug it up and I'm putting a picture of that show coverage behind us there. Great band. And I would still say, when I do like my list of my 100 favorite songs of all time, Interstate Love Song is always on that list. So
for sure,
a beautiful tune.
I'll have to play that for you sometime.
And then B, Motley Crue, Tommy Lee and Pam Anderson lived next door. Before they got divorced, they lived next door to my aunt and uncle in Calabasas. They had lived in Calabasas for 40 years, and they moved in next door.
I wonder if they know Jason.
Probably, but again, I'll show behind us there. We did a cover episode during the RockLove years of Motley Crue, and I interviewed Tommy and Mick Mars, and they were very, the stage thing is all just a show, like these
I know.
when I think about most of these people, because again, with RockLove, I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, the common denominator you always found is that these were real people, and half of what you saw on stage was just an act. So.
Oh yeah, that was their personality on stage, of course.
Right. So
that became clear. It's so fun that you got to do way more than I did, but the times I got into it was just so fun.
So before we wrap up, let me do this. I always like to recount some things from Rock Love from the magazine and what we did back then. And if we go back to March of 1998, I have a couple of tales to tell you. First of all, as Jeff and I were discussing, Motley Crue. Motley Crue was on the cover of the magazine in March of 1998. I was fortunate enough to have a interview with Tommy Lee and Mick Mars. And I remember Tommy Lee, when I got on the phone, saying to me, "Hey, dude, I haven't heard or seen your magazine, but the guys tell me it's really great." And I'm sure he was just fluffing me up at the time, but felt good nonetheless. So nice guys, great band. As I said to Jeff, the onstage thing is a bunch of an act. They're, just all nice, regular people. So I'm not going to tell you the whole tale about this minute, but I'm going to wet your whistle here, and I'll tell it in another one of our live concert episodes. The Rolling Stones and Pearl Jam. This was a night that will live in rock love infamy, technologically speaking. And again, I'm not going to tell you the whole story. I want you to come back and see when Jeff and I or somebody else and I do another episode of our favorite live stories. That was a nightmare evening for Rock Love Magazine that ended up in a magical finish. Look at this picture. Look at some of these pictures. The Rolling Stones at their finest, as covered by Rock Love Magazine, as well as Pearl Jam, when they were at the apex of being Pearl Jam and taking over the alternative scene after the death of Kurt Cobain and the disbandment of Nirvana. Like I said, if I had time to tell you the story, I would, but I'm going to save it for another time. There were a lot of other great things in that episode, but those are the two main things that I wanted to show you as we recall and remind ourselves of what we were covering almost 30 years ago in Rock Love Magazine. So that'll do it for today. I want to thank Jeff Becker for joining me yet again. He has great stories. No doubt I will be asking him to come back and play with us some more. I'm Scott. This is the Rock Love Magazine Podcast, where we celebrate the zine that ran from 1995 to 2001, covering the music of the day of the post-Nirvana era, as well as discussing our favorite music of all time, giving you lists and explanations behind them, as we did today with some of our live show stories, and certainly not forgetting to try and discover some of the best new music today. Have yourself a great day. We'll see you next time on the Rock Love Magazine Podcast.